This studio photograph looks ordinary until you notice what the mother is holding in her hand. Dr. Marcus Webb had spent 15 years sorting through forgotten photographs in the basement, archives of the Atlanta Historical Society. But nothing prepared him for what he found on a humid Tuesday morning in June 2024. The photograph came in a donated collection from an estate sale. It was a simple studio portrait, sepia-toned and creased at the edges, about 8 by 10 inches. 4 faces looked back at him from across 125 years. The picture showed a black family of 4, dressed formally and standing against a painted backdrop that looked like a Victorian parlor. The father stood stiff on the left, his hand resting on the back of an ornate chair, wearing a dark suit with a high collar that seemed a bit tight around his neck. Beside him sat the mother, her face hard to read, her posture perfect, hands folded carefully in her lap. A boy of about 10 years stood between his parents, and a small girl, no more than 5, sat on a low stool at her mother's feet, her tiny hands clasped together. Marcus held the photograph closer to the window so the morning light could shine on the faded surface. The studio mark stamped in the lower right corner said, Patterson & Sons Photography, Birmingham, Alabama, 1899. He wrote a note in his catalog, another family without names, identities lost over a century of neglect. But something about this picture held his attention longer than usual. Maybe it was the strong look in the mother's eyes, or the way her body leaned a little toward her daughter. Maybe it was the careful way everyone was placed, as if the moment had been planned and carried meaning beyond a simple family portrait. Marcus put the photograph on his desk and reached for his digital scanner. The Historical Society had recently bought high-resolution scanning equipment that could catch details the naked eye could not see, and he had made it his job to digitize every photograph before they fell apart further. He placed the image face down on the glass, closed the lid, and pressed the scan button. The machine hummed softly as light moved under the photograph. Marcus turned back to his computer screen, expecting nothing more than a clearer version of what he had already seen. The progress bar filled slowly. When the image finally appeared on his monitor, he leaned forward and began the usual work of adjusting contrast and brightness. Then he saw it. Marcus's hand stopped on the mouse. He had zoomed into the lower part of the photograph, looking at the details of the daughter's dress, when his eye caught something unusual in the mother's right hand. What had looked like simply folded hands in the original photograph now showed something more. Between her thumb and forefinger, partly hidden by the careful placement of her fingers, was the edge of something small and white. A piece of paper folded many times into a tight square no bigger than a postage stamp. His breath caught. In 15 years of studying historical photographs, he had learned to notice the details others missed. The hidden jewelry that showed secret wealth, the faint skin marks that revealed untreated illness, the background objects that dated images better than studio marks. But this was different. This was deliberate hiding. Marcus increased the magnification until the pixels started to blur. The paper was clearly there, held so carefully that it would not show in a normal print. Only the high-resolution scan and digital enhancement had revealed it. But why? Why would a mother pose for an expensive studio portrait, a rare luxury for any black family in Sycamore, 1899 Alabama, while secretly holding something in her hand? He sat back in his chair, his mind running through possibilities. A love letter, a religious verse, a good luck charm. None of those felt right. The photograph itself spoke of formality and importance. The family's clothing was clean and carefully chosen, likely borrowed or saved for over months. The father's shoes were polished to a shine. The children's faces had been scrubbed clean, their hair carefully fixed. This was not a casual sitting. This was a statement, a record meant to last, to prove something. Marcus pulled out his notebook and began writing down everything he could see. The mother's age, about 30 to 35 years old. Her expression controlled, almost stern, but with something urgent in her eyes. Her posture protective, especially toward the daughter, and her hands deliberately placed to hide whatever she held. He spent the next hour examining every part of the digital image. The father's face showed the worn lines of outdoor work. The boy's eyes held a tiredness that seemed far too old for his age. The little girl looked straight at the camera, with an openness that broke Marcus's heart. She could not have known what dangers her family faced every day in Jim Crow, Alabama. She could not have understood why her mother gripped that tiny piece of paper as if her life depended on it. As afternoon shadows stretched across his desk, Marcus made a decision. This photograph deserved more than a catalog number and a dusty shelf. This family deserved to be remembered. Marcus started where he always did, with the studio itself. Patterson & Sons Photography had operated in Birmingham from 1887 to 1923. According to city directories, the studio had been located on 4th Avenue North in a district that served both white and black clients, though not at the same times or with the same treatment. By Wednesday morning, Marcus had asked for access to the Birmingham Public Libraries, archives, and found himself driving north on I-65, the photograph carefully stored in an acid-free sleeve in his briefcase. The library's local history department filled the entire third floor of the downtown branch. Margaret Chen, the senior archivist, greeted him with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely received visitors interested in 19th-century photography studios. She was a small woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. "Patterson & Sons," she said, leading him to a long table covered with ledgers and boxes. They kept careful records, thank goodness. Business ledgers, client logs, even some letters. "What year are you looking for?" 1899, Marcus replied, taking the photograph from his briefcase. "I think it was taken sometime between March and November, based on the weight of the clothing." Margaret put on her glasses and studied the image. Her expression changed almost at once from professional interest to something deeper. "My God," she whispered. "Look at their faces. Look at what they are carrying in their eyes." Marcus felt a rush of confirmation. He was not imagining the weight of this photograph. "I need to know who they were. There is something hidden in this image, literally hidden." The mother is holding a piece of paper in her hand. Margaret's eyes widened. She took the photograph to the window, tilting it in the light. "I can barely see it, but yes, you are right." "How did you spot this?" "High-resolution scanning and digital enhancement." Whatever she is holding, she did not want it visible in the original print, but she wanted it there in the photograph with her family. "Like a message," Margaret said softly. "A message to the future." They spent the next 4 hours going through Patterson & Sons client logs from 1899. The ledgers listed names, dates, and services, along with prices paid. Most entries were short. "Wilson family, 4 poses, $2. 50, or Miss Dorothy Hayes, portrait sitting, $1. 75 sons. The prices were significant. $2.50 was nearly a week's wages for many workers in 1899. Marcus's eyes burned from reading faded handwriting by late afternoon. Then Margaret's finger stopped on an entry dated August 12, 1899. "Freeman family, colored, 4 poses, formal sitting, $3. Payment in full." "Freeman," Marcus said aloud. "That could be it. 4 people, formal sitting. The price matches a special occasion." The name Freeman carried its own weight in post-abolition America. Many formerly enslaved people had taken the surname after emancipation, a declaration of their new status. But it also made family research very difficult. There were thousands of Freeman families across the South, many with no records beyond oral histories that had faded with time. Marcus returned to Atlanta that evening with copies of the studio ledger and a renewed sense of purpose. He spent the next 2 days searching through census records, city directories, and birth registries. The 1900 federal census, taken just months after the photograph was made, became his main focus. He searched for Freeman families in Birmingham, with 2 children matching the approximate ages. On Friday afternoon, he found them. The census record listed Freeman, James, head of household, black male, age 34, occupation carpenter. Freeman, Ruth, wife, black female, age 32, occupation laundress. Freeman, Samuel, son, black male, age 10, at school. Freeman, Clara, daughter, black female, age 5, at school. Marcus's hands shook as he printed the document. James, Ruth, Samuel, and Clara Freeman. After 125 years of anonymity, The family in the photograph finally had names. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. What had driven the Freeman family to spend $3, a large sum, on a formal photograph in August 1899? What was Ruth Freeman hiding in her hand? And most important, why had she felt the need to hide it at all? He began searching for more records. James Freeman appeared in Birmingham city directories from 1897 through 1902 as a carpenter, working in construction. His name showed up on several building permits for homes in the colored district near 16th Street. By all accounts, he had established himself as a skilled tradesman with steady work, a notable achievement for a black man in Jim Crow, Alabama. Ruth Freeman proved harder to find. Laundresses rarely appeared in official records beyond census listings. But Marcus found her name in an unexpected place: the membership rolls of the 16th Street Baptist Church, where she had served on the Women's Auxiliary Committee. The church, which would become tragically famous 64 years later, when a bomb killed 4 young girls, had been a center of black community life in Birmingham since its founding in 1873. Marcus contacted the church's current historian, a retired teacher named Dorothy Williams, and explained his research. 2 days later, she called him back with news that made his heart race. "I found something in our old records," Dorothy said, her voice tight with feeling. "A notation from September 1899, just 1 month after your photograph was taken. It is a prayer request submitted by Ruth Freeman. It says, 'Prayers for safe passage and protection of our daughter Clara. May the Lord shield her from those who would do harm.'" Marcus closed his eyes. Protection from whom? That is what I intend to help you find out. Dorothy Williams arrived at the Atlanta Historical Society the following Tuesday, carrying a worn leather portfolio stuffed with photocopied documents. She was a tall woman in her 70s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen decades of Birmingham's painful history. She settled into the chair across from Marcus's desk and spread the documents before them, like evidence at a trial. "You need to understand what 1899 Birmingham was like for black families," she began, her voice steady but heavy with feeling. The city was 26 years into Reconstruction's failure. The promise of freedom had turned into something else entirely, a system designed to keep black people as close to slavery as the law would allow. She pushed forward a newspaper clipping from the Birmingham Age-Herald, dated July 15, 1899. The headline read, "Convict Lease System Expands. State Profits from Negro Labor in Mines and Mills." Marcus scanned the article, his stomach turning at the casual cruelty of the language. The matter-of-fact description of black men and women being arrested on made-up charges and sentenced to hard labor that often proved fatal. But it was not just adults they targeted, Dorothy continued. She laid out another document, a report from the Alabama Children's Aid Society from 1898. Children could be taken too, orphaned, abandoned, or simply called vagrant. Black children especially. They would be placed in apprenticeships that were slavery by another name. Marcus thought of 5-year-old Clara Freeman, her open face staring at the camera. "You think Ruth was afraid someone would try to take Clara?" "I think Ruth had reason to believe Clara was in specific danger." Dorothy pulled out a handwritten letter, the paper brittle with age. "This was donated to our church archive by Ruth Freeman's great-niece in 1987. It is a letter Ruth wrote to her sister in Montgomery, dated August 5, 1899, exactly 1 week before that photograph was taken." Marcus carefully unfolded the letter. Ruth Freeman's handwriting was precise and educated, each word formed with care. "Dearest Sarah, I write with a troubled heart. A man came to our home yesterday, a white man who claimed to represent the Birmingham Industrial School. He said Clara was of an age to benefit from their educational program and that they could provide better opportunities than we could give her. James sent him away firmly but politely. But Sarah, I know what that school truly is. I know they take children and work them in the cotton mills and factories, calling it education. I cannot let them have her. I will not. We are taking steps to protect our daughter. Pray for us. Your loving sister, Ruth." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Marcus read the letter 3 times, each word sharpening the picture in his mind. The photograph was not just a family portrait. It was a defensive act, a declaration, a weapon against those who would claim Clara did not belong to her parents. "The paper in her hand," Marcus said slowly. "It has to be Clara's birth certificate." Dorothy nodded. "Or freedom papers, if the family had them from before abolition. Either way, proof that Clara was born free, that she belonged to James and Ruth Freeman, that no institution or individual had any claim to her." Marcus spent the next week deep in archives, chasing pieces of the Freeman family story, through the sparse records that documented black lives in turn-of-the-century Alabama. Birth certificates from that era were not always filed, especially for black children. Many births went unrecorded entirely, leaving families open to exactly the kind of danger Ruth had feared. He found Clara Freeman's birth certificate on a Thursday afternoon buried in a misfiled box at the Jefferson County Courthouse. The document, dated March 3, 1894, listed Clara's parents as James Freeman and Ruth Freeman, maiden name Washington, both noted as free persons of color. The certificate was signed by Dr. Henry Morrison, a white physician who had sometimes served the black community, and carried an official county seal. Marcus photographed the document from every angle, noting its size, about 2 inches by 3 inches when folded, small enough to hide in a closed hand. The paper was of good quality, suggesting the family had paid extra for a lasting copy. He could imagine Ruth folding it carefully, creasing it until it became small enough to hide, important enough to carry always. But the birth certificate alone did not explain the depth of Ruth's fear. Marcus needed to know more about the Birmingham Industrial School mentioned in her letter. He found references in city records. The school had been established in 1895, supposedly to provide vocational training to wayward and orphaned children. In practice, as Dorothy had suggested, it worked as a source of cheap child labor for Birmingham's growing industrial sector. A report from the Alabama State Labor Inspector in 1901 confirmed the worst. Children as young as 6 years old working 12-hour shifts in cotton mills, their small fingers ideal for threading machinery. The report noted that a large percentage of these working children were placed through the Birmingham Industrial School system, though questions remained about how voluntary such placements really were. Marcus discovered something else in the labor inspector's woe: a list of recruitment agents employed by the school to find potential students. One name made him pause. Mr. Horace Whitfield, described as particularly active in the colored districts, where he has successfully placed numerous children in beneficial apprenticeships. The same Horace Whitfield appeared in Birmingham police records from 1899. He had been given authority to remove children from homes judged unsuitable by the school's board of directors. The rules for unsuitability were deliberately vague, giving Whitfield enormous power. Marcus sat back in his chair, the pieces coming together into a picture that sickened him. Whitfield had come to the Freeman home that August day in 1899, targeting Clara specifically. Perhaps he had seen her playing in the street, had noted her age and health. Perhaps someone had mentioned that James Freeman was often away on carpentry jobs, leaving Ruth alone with the children. Whatever his reason, Whitfield had marked Clara Freeman as a candidate for his industrial school system, and Ruth had responded by doing the one thing she could: documenting her daughter's existence, establishing her legal identity, and creating a photographic record that would prove Clara belonged to her family. Marcus contacted the Birmingham Industrial School's successor organization, now operating as a legitimate educational nonprofit. Their archivist, a young man named Timothy Ross, at first seemed confused by the inquiry, but when Marcus explained the context, a family photographed in 1899, a mother hiding her daughter's birth certificate, a recruitment agent named Horace Whitfield, Timothy's manner changed. "Give me 2 days," Timothy said quietly. "We have been cataloging historical records for a transparency project. If Whitfield tried to take Clara Freeman, there might be documentation." Those 2 days felt like 2 weeks. Marcus returned to the digitized photograph, examining it with fresh eyes. Ruth's expression no longer seemed merely stern. It was defiant. Her posture was not just protective, it was confrontational. She was staring straight into the camera, straight across 125 years of history, as if daring anyone to challenge her right to keep her daughter. The formal placement of the family, which Marcus had first thought was just Victorian photography style, now looked deliberate in a different way. James's hand on the chair was not casual. It was proprietary, claiming ownership of his space and his family. Samuel stood between his parents like a bridge, his young face already showing the guardedness that black boys learned early for survival. And Clara, small Clara, sat at her mother's feet under the protection of her mother's hidden proof. Timothy called on Saturday morning. I found him. Horace Whitfield submitted a report to the school's director on August 8, 1899. He identified Clara Freeman, age 5, as a suitable candidate for the domestic training program. He noted that the family lived in a modest dwelling in the colored district, and that the father was frequently absent due to itinerant carpentry work. He recommended immediate placement and requested authorization to retrieve the child. Marcus's jaw tightened. What happened? Was authorization granted? That is where it gets interesting. There is a second notation dated August 15, 1899, 3 days after the Freeman family's photograph was taken. Whitfield reported that he had returned to the Freeman residence to carry out the placement, but the family had produced documentation proving legal parentage and free birth status of the Freeman child. He noted that the parents became hostile and that he judged it unwise to proceed without additional legal authority. Ruth had shown him the birth certificate. She had shown him proof, Timothy confirmed. And apparently, even in 1899 Birmingham, that was enough to make Whitfield back down, at least for a time. There is one more note in the file dated August 22. Whitfield wrote that he had observed the family leaving Birmingham by railroad. Destination unknown. He recommended closing the case. Marcus felt his heart pounding. They left. The photograph, the birth certificate. It bought them enough time to escape. That is my reading. And Marcus, there is something else. Attached to Whitfield's final report is a small newspaper clipping. It is from the Birmingham Age Herald, dated August 20, 1899. Would you like to know what it says? Yes. Timothy's voice tightened with emotion as he read. Local Negro carpenter James Freeman has relocated his family to Chicago to pursue expanded business opportunities. Freeman, known for quality craftsmanship, stated that he seeks a city where his children might attend better schools and where his wife might find opportunity beyond domestic service. The family departed Thursday morning. The departure announcement in the Birmingham newspaper was remarkable for what it craftsmanship were represented. In 1899, black families who left the South rarely received newspaper mention unless their leaving was framed as evidence of ingratitude or failure. But James Freeman had managed to control his own story, presenting the move to Chicago as ambition rather than flight. It was a final act of dignity, a public statement that allowed the family to leave with their reputation intact. Marcus traced the Freemans' path northward through railroad manifests and city directories. By September 1899, they appeared in the Chicago City Directory, living at an address on South State Street in the city's growing black community. James had found work with a construction company, building homes in the neighborhoods that would later become known as Bronzeville. Ruth's name appeared in different records. She had joined the Bethel AME Church and, according to membership notes, had become active in the church's Mutual Aid Society, an organization that provided support to black families new to the city. The notation beside her name included a detail that made Marcus smile, skilled with correspondence and record-keeping. The children's records were more scattered, but ultimately more hopeful. Samuel Freeman enrolled at the Phillips School on South Wabash Avenue in October 1899. The school's annual report from 1900 listed him as an exceptionally hard-working student, with particular skill in mathematics. Clara enrolled the following year at age 6 at the same school, but it was what Marcus found in the 1910 census that truly moved him. The Freeman family still lived in Chicago, now at a larger address on South Michigan Avenue. James was listed as owning his carpentry business. Ruth was noted as not employed outside the home, which likely meant she had reached the goal many black women sought, freedom from working in white households. Samuel, now 20 years old, was listed as a student at the University of Chicago, and Clara, at 16, was noted as a student at Wendell Phillips High School, one of Chicago's leading public schools. They had made it. The family that had fled Birmingham in August 1899, with Ruth clutching her daughter's birth certificate during a desperate photograph, had built a new life in Chicago. The photograph had been more than documentation. It had been a declaration that they existed, that they belonged to each other, that no institution or individual could claim otherwise. Marcus contacted the Chicago History Museum and spoke with a genealogist named Patricia Henderson. When he explained the Freeman family story and showed her the 1899 photograph, she disappeared into the archives for 3 days. When she came out, she brought news that changed everything. "I found Clara," Patricia said, her voice trembling slightly. Clara Freeman married in 1915 to a Pullman porter named Robert Hayes. She had 4 children, all of whom attended college. Her youngest daughter, Dorothy Hayes, became a teacher in the Chicago public school system and was active in the civil rights movement during the 1960s. "Is Dorothy still alive?" Marcus asked, hardly daring to hope. "No, but her daughter is. Her name is Michelle Hayes Robinson. She is 72 years old and lives in Oak Park." And Marcus, she has been trying to research her family history for years, but she could not get past Clara's childhood in Birmingham. She did not know anything about the photograph. Marcus sat in his office for 20 minutes before making the call, practicing what he would say. How do you tell someone that you found a piece of their family's history they never knew existed? How do you explain that their great-great-grandmother had hidden a birth certificate in her hand during a photograph 125 years ago, protecting a 5-year-old girl who would grow up to become their great-grandmother? Michelle Hayes Robinson answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was warm and slightly breathless, as if she had hurried to the phone. Marcus introduced himself, explained his work with the Atlanta Historical Society, and asked if she had time to discuss her family history. "I have all the time in the world for that conversation," Michelle said. "I have been trying to trace my grandmother Clara's early life for decades, but I keep hitting walls. I know she was born in Alabama, and I know the family moved to Chicago when she was young, but I do not know why they left, or what their life was like before." Marcus took a breath. "I found a photograph of your family taken in Birmingham in August 1899. Your great-great-grandparents, James and Ruth Freeman, with their children, Samuel and Clara. Clara would have been 5 years old." The line went silent for so long that Marcus thought the call had dropped. Then he heard Michelle's voice thick with emotion. "You found them? You found a picture of them? I found more than that. I found the reason they left Birmingham. And I found something your great-great-grandmother Ruth was hiding in the photograph. Something she held in her hand to protect Clara." Over the next hour, Marcus told Michelle everything. The high-resolution scan that revealed the hidden paper, the church prayer request, the letter to Ruth's sister, the Birmingham Industrial School recruitment agent, Clara's birth certificate, and the family's escape to Chicago. He emailed her the digitized photograph and waited while she opened it on her computer. He heard her sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God. Look at her face. Look at my great-great-grandmother's face. She is so fierce. She was protecting your great-grandmother Clara from being taken by a system that treated black children as industrial resources. The paper she is holding, we believe it is Clara's birth certificate, proof that Clara belonged to her family, that she was born free, that no one had the right to take her." Michelle was crying now, making no effort to hide it. "My grandmother Clara died when I was 15. She was 92 years old. She told me stories about Chicago, about her father's carpentry business, about her mother's work with the church, but she never talked about Birmingham. She never talked about being 5 years old and having to leave everything behind. The trauma probably went too deep," Marcus said gently. "She might not have remembered the details, or she might have chosen not to pass them down. But your great-great-grandmother Ruth made sure there was a record. This photograph, taken right before they fled, was her way of saying, 'We exist, we matter, we belong to each other.'" They talked for another hour. Michelle shared what she knew about Clara's life in Chicago, her marriage to Robert Hayes, her 4 children, her work as a seamstress, and later as a community organizer. Clara had lived to see the civil rights movement, had marched in Chicago alongside Martin Luther King Jr. in 1966, and had died in 1986, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She lived a full life, Michelle said, because Ruth fought for her, because Ruth would not let them take her baby. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the main exhibition hall of the Atlanta Historical Society, watching as visitors gathered around a new display. The 1899 photograph of the Freeman family occupied the center. enlarged and carefully restored, with Ruth's hidden birth certificate visible in a detailed inset image showing the enhanced zoom. Surrounding the photograph were the documents Marcus had discovered: Clara, its birth certificate, Ruth's letter to her sister, the church prayer request, Horace Whitfield's recruitment reports, and the Birmingham newspaper announcement of the family's departure. But the most powerful part of the display was the modern photograph mounted beside the historical one. Michelle Hayes Robinson had gathered Clara's descendants, more than 30 people spanning 4 generations, for a family portrait in Chicago. They stood together in front of Bethel Church, the same church Ruth had joined in 1899. In the photograph, Michelle held a framed copy of the original 1899 image, closing the circle across 125 years. The exhibition text, written by Marcus with input from Michelle and Dorothy Williams, told the Freeman family story without excess emotion, but with the weight it deserved. It explained the setting of 1899 Birmingham, the threat that Clara had faced, and Ruth's act of resistance through documentation and photography. It described the family's successful escape to Chicago and Clara's long life, and it ended with a question that invited reflection. How many other families left similar records hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered and honored? Michelle had traveled from Chicago for the exhibition opening. She stood beside Marcus now, her hand resting on his arm, tears streaming down her face as she watched strangers stop to read her family's story. A young black girl, perhaps 8 years old, stood fixed before the photograph of 5-year-old Clara. "Mama," the girl said, tugging her mother's hand, "that little girl looks like me." "She does, baby," her mother replied softly. "She looks like all of us." Marcus thought about the journey this photograph had taken. From a Birmingham studio in August 1899, where Ruth Freeman had clutched her daughter's birth certificate in her hand, while staring defiantly at the camera, through 125 years of darkness in attics and archives, to this moment where it could finally tell its story to an audience ready to listen. The photograph had served its purpose in 1899, giving the Freeman family the documentation and courage they needed to escape. But it served a purpose now too, reminding everyone who saw it that resistance took many forms, that love showed itself through fierce protection, and that the determination to keep the Dye's family together in the face of systems designed to tear them apart was itself a form of heroism. That evening, after the exhibition hall had closed, Marcus returned to his office and opened the file containing dozens of other photographs he had catalogued over the years. Anonymous faces, forgotten names, stories waiting to be discovered. He began scanning them with new eyes, looking for the hidden details, the clutched objects, the defiant stares, the messages sent across time. Somewhere in these images, other families were waiting to be found. Other mothers had hidden other proofs. Other stories deserved to be told. And Marcus intended to find them one photograph at a time, bringing the past into conversation with the present, until every forgotten face had a name, and every act of courage had a witness. The Freeman family's photograph remained on his desk, Ruth's fierce eyes watching over his a reminder that history is not just what gets recorded in official documents, but what families preserve in the margins, in the hidden spaces, in the desperate acts of love that echo across generations.